But now look at Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 11, because God has another promise. And you notice I kept emphasizing the first time they came back was Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel. And that was the whole time we read about in the New Testament. But there's a second return the Bible talks about. And Isaiah 11 verse 11 says this, "It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time." That's interesting. "To recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, and Cush, and Elam, and Shinar, and Hamath, and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations. He will assemble the outcast of Israel. He will gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." If I had time, I could read you, because did you know that 20% of the Bible is still unfulfilled? It's prophetic, and almost all of it's about Israel? Did you know that? Did you know that there is so much left in the Bible about Israel that it would take a year of family camps to just read through and comment on the verses, let alone fully study them? God has a miracle that's unfolding in our midst, and it's the miracle of Israel. And God said that those who witness, watch this, verse 11, those who witness the Lord setting his hand again the second time to recover the remnant, Isaiah 11:11, are going to be witnessing something that Psalm 102 says is the final generation. Now, I don't know, a lot of people there, I don't know if you read the news, but we have generation, we're the boomers. I guess I'm a baby boomer, and then there's generation, the busters, and then I forget all these titles, and then there's generation X, and I guess there's a Y, and I don't know what it is now, but Q or something, but there's all these generations. But you know what God says? In fact, let's turn there so you can see it. Look at Psalm 102. Some of you have never really probably gotten into prophecy, and especially some of you young people, the Bible might still be a little bit boring. But the Bible, in detail, talks about our generation. In fact, there are people that are alive in this room who have lived through prophecy being fulfilled of God saying a second time, I'm going to draw the nation of Israel back, and they've actually seen it. You say, really? Yeah, let me read the 102nd Psalm to you, and I want to see if any of this rings a bell. Okay, Psalm 102. Starting in verse 3. This is a prayer of complaint. Sounds like it to me too. Verse 3. "For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned like a hearth. My heart is stricken and withered like grass, so that I forget my bread. Because of the sound of my groaning, my bones cling to my skin. I'm like a pelican in the wilderness, an owl in the desert. I'm like a sparrow alone on the housetop." Look at verse 9. "I have eaten ashes like bread. I have mingled my drink with weeping." Now, so far, all I'm doing is reading a psalm that we've all read all of our life, and we say, that's really bad. It sounds terrible. Now, let me overlay on top of that psalm some historical events that have happened in the last 50 years. Every scripture has a direct interpretation, which is what God meant when he wrote it to those people. Prophetic scriptures have an immediate as well as a future application. You say, what do you mean by that? The prophets that saw the coming of Christ could only see the ultimate second coming as king because they didn't realize the immediate coming as the suffering servant. They missed it. That twofold nature of prophecy is overwhelming. Let me just give you an overlay of this. Can you tell? It's one of my favorite subjects, and so I have to get moving here. My days are consumed like smoke. Literally, the word like is the Hebrew word in. Was there ever a time when Jewish people's days were consumed in smoke in the last 50 years? Can you think of any? Oh, actually, the last 60 years? Yeah. Nazi concentration camps. Have there ever been a time in history that more Jews were burned than from 1939 to 1945? No. Look at this. My heart is stricken and withered like grass. I don't eat. My bones, verse 5, cling to my skin. Have you ever seen the pictures of what it looked like when the Allies liberated the people from the concentration camps? Didn't they look like their bones were sticking to their skin? Literally. Look at verse 9. I've eaten ashes like bread. I just read these words in May to a whole group of people sitting in the Valley of the Lost Communities, which is a very moving and very sobering spot in Israel where there are these 50-foot high pillars of stone, and on the sides of them are written all of the cities that no longer exist on this planet because the Nazis came through and absolutely destroyed every living Jew, every breathing Jew, absolutely massacred every one of them. And it's called the Valley of Lost Communities, and it's just listings of cities, entire cities, millions of people. While they were doing that, you know what happened? In the center of those camps, Dachau and Auschwitz and all the rest of them, there would be the crematorium right in the center. And they would be taking those people and they would be burning them, and the historians would tell us, in fact, some of those who survived it said that there would be a white and gray smoke that just never stopped rising, and that there was dust that would settle all over the camp from the burning of these bodies in the crematoriums. And what they said, curiously, when it rained, and the people were out doing their work out in the camp that they made them do, that often the people would come in to the dorms with their faces looking like someone had put flour on them. And as it rained, the rain would run that dust of the crematorium down their faces, and as the people licked their lips. Look at verse 9. I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping. As the tears ran down their face, they'd go in their mouth. As the rain came down, and they actually ate the ashes of their brothers and sisters that were being burned in the center of the camp. Fascinating. Look at verse 12, because it gets hopeful. That's the Holocaust. And if you've never seen the Holocaust in the Scriptures, this is one of many places that it shows up, what was promised. All of Deuteronomy and Leviticus said that they would be encircled, they would eat their own children, that they would have more horrors, they would be afraid and hunted down, and all that. It happened. Look at verse 12. Here's the restoration. But you, O Lord, shall endure forever. The remembrance of your name to all generations. You will arise and have mercy on Zion, for the time to favor her. Yes, the set time has come. Your servants take pleasure in her stones and show favor to her dust. Have you watched the movies on the news of the 1.1 million Russian Jews in the last 10 years that have left Russia and come to Israel? 1.1 million. That would be like putting everybody in the Detroit metro area on an airplane and flying them to Israel, all the people. That's how many were. 1.1 million people have flown in 10 years out of Russia to Israel. That should cause shivers if you are a Bible lover, because God says, I'm going to do something in the last days. He says, I am going to, Isaiah 11:11, a second time I'm going to turn my attention toward the Jews, and I'm going to bring them from all four corners of the earth. Did you know that right now in Israel there are Jews from 100 different nations living in Israel? How many? 100. Now America, you go to Michigan State and you got 20 different nationalities represented, maybe 30. Israel has 100 different nations of Jewish people from the dispersion. 100 different countries around the world. One of them just called us, a friend of ours who is a Jew. His father was a judge in New Jersey. And he moved back to Israel, and he was talking to Bonnie. Called her for an hour. He says, you know what, I can see the bombs. He lives by Bethlehem. And he said, I can see it. And he said, I look and I think, what am I doing here? And then he says, I think this is where I want to be, and I don't even know why. He's not a Christian. He's not a believer. He says, I'm a part of history, I think. He is. But you know what God said? He said, your servants will take pleasure in her stones. Have you seen what happens when they come? Those people get off the airplane, and the first place they want to go is Jerusalem, and they get there, and they get down on their hands and knees, and they kiss the stones of Jerusalem. They don't care how dirty they are. That's the attitude God said I'll put in the hearts of my people when I bring them back. They will love the stone. They will take pleasure in her stones. And the nations, look at verse 15, will fear the name of the Lord, and all the kings of the earth your glory. For the Lord shall build up Zion. Did you know, right now, more people live in Jerusalem than have ever lived in Jerusalem in history? More Jews. You realize that? Even when David was the king, and Solomon, and Rehoboam, and Hezekiah, and all the rest, there were not as many Jews living in Jerusalem as live there today. You say, so what? They didn't live there 100 years ago. That's what. And they didn't live there 200 or 300 or 400 or 500. They have not lived there for 1900 years. They have been banned until our generation. They came back. Well, what does God say about that? Look at verse 18. This will be written for Lador Acharon. Oh, you don't have a Hebrew Bible? What does it say in English? For the generation to come? Literally, Lador Acharon. Lador means generation. Acharon means final. Now that is a generation to come. But doesn't it sound a little different when you see the word final? You know, Hal Lindsey, Campus Crusade missionary and one of the great selling authors of all time, wrote a book called The Terminal Generation. You know, he needs to write another one called The Final Generation. Because in God's book, the generation that sees Israel return to the land in unbelief, God says in Psalm 102, verse 18, that this is written for the final generation.